On an SSL AWS, we have two different types of path that can be selected, whereas we're recording or mixing. As a matter of fact, it's really important for you to understand when and how to use this path. The SSL features a tracking path or recording path, which is generally highlighted in red, and a monitoring or mixing path, which is generally highlighted in green. Now, these two paths dictates how audio will float through each single channel of the SSL and what type of output will be sent to your monitors. What we're going to be doing here is taking a look a little bit at this meters over here. So as you can see here, I'm having a mix that features some tracks that are mono, stereo. And the beauty of this board is that actually, if I move back into my analog relay, we could actually customize each single channel. As a matter of fact, channel works as a mono and stereo. As you can see over here, I have an acoustic guitar, a low guitar, and a solo guitar. I'm gonna let you hear them all. All right, so you get an idea. So what I want you to notice is over here, we have our channel LED. And if I press play on the first guitar, let's say, as you can see, our LED shows up the stereo return from the track inside Pro Tools. Now, we could easily split a channel from mono to stereo when we are in mixing mode. In this case, what I'm going to do is to select my track, and here in the master module generally is where you could change the type of track you're working with. So by default, tracks when they are in mixing mode are in mono. As you can see right now, we only have one single LED light green, and if I press play, I'm going to do this for every other track. So I want to talk to you about how to properly understand the splitting side of the console while mixing. We're going to cover recording in a different tutorial. So right now here in Pro Tools, I have a session ready to be mixed that contains different types of tracks. We're dealing with mono tracks and as well as some stereo stem of acoustic guitars, electric guitars, and piano. On my console right now, as you can see, I have already set it up some of my tracks in receiving mono, the ones that are defaulted with monitoring mode or mixing mode, and then I've flipped some other tracks. As a matter of fact, you can start seeing this different LED over here. I'm going to start soloing up the tracks that I've already flipped, which are my percussion, drums, and bass. So as you can see right now, my rooms are in stereo, my overheads are in stereo, as you could actually tell from the meter here. And of course, our snare drum over here, it's in mono. Now, over here, I have a couple tracks. I'm gonna start selecting them. That being my guitars, acoustic guitar, and piano, which have actually been stemmed out into stereo. But right now what we're hearing is only the mono version of it. So what I'm going to do is fast forward a little bit into the song. So let's start with this first rhythm guitar. This track over here. As you can see right now, it's two guitars that have been dubbed, but even though they have been outputted to my track number 9, I'm only receiving a mono version, as you can see over here. So here's what you want to do. First and foremost, you want to select the track that you want to flip into stereo. Then you're going to go into your master section, and what you're going to be doing is pressing the ST to transform the track into stereo. Now on the track itself, you should see two things. The first thing happens on the meter. So take a look at the meter, which right now is in mono. I'll press ST. Now our guitar is in stereo. Mono. Stereo. Secondly, on my path here, you're going to notice that right now my path is receiving into mono. So once I press my stereo, my path is going to move from mono to stereo. We're going to have these two lights indicating us that our song or our track is being received into stereo. I am going to do the exact same thing for the rest of the tracks. So we're having our solo guitar, low guitar, arpeggio guitar, acoustic guitars, and piano. So I'm going to select them all. And flip them. This is great because right now you could use one fader to actually work with a stereo track rather than using two faders to receive the return of a stereo track. So right now what I'm going to do is let you hear all the tracks and even actually the piano, which I've muted before. So as you can see, these tracks over here, so from my rhythm guitar to my piano, have been stemmed out into stereo, but the console is receiving them into mono. And mono is generally the function that the board is going to set it up itself with when we are about to mix. Now the great thing is that right now we could select our track through our track selector. And from the master section, there is a button called ST, stereo. So we could flip each single mono analog track into stereo analog track. So listen what's going to happen. Right now, everything is in mono. I'm going to go ahead and press ST. I'm going to use my solo clear to clean up the solo. So it's that easy to really kind of like maximize the workflow and the creative ideas through the power of this board. So now I'm going to go ahead and dissect each single section of this board from top to bottom, left to right, in order for you to understand exactly each single step along the way, whether if you have to track, whether if you have to mix, or whether if you have to do both, or maybe just writing some automation or taking some snapshot. The SSL AWS 948 features 24 SSL-K analog channels and as well combines the best of both worlds, as we could use this amazing console as a DAW controller. We have from top to bottom our monitoring section, routing mixes, our preamplifiers, EQ, sends, fader section, and a master section over here. I'm going to go ahead and dissect part by part the different sections of this console. Starting from the top, we're having our LED screens or LED meters. As you can see over here, each single track has a stereo pair of LEDs. As a matter of fact, we could flip each single track from mono to stereo. That means that if we're looking to a more real estate point of view, we don't have to use two faders to per se have a sum of a group of instruments or return of effect, but we can simply flip a mono track into stereo. We're going to see this in a little bit. Right now, we are in mixing mode. That means that we are receiving signal into line. So over here, we have our LED giving us the exact reading we would get into Pro Tools of the levels of each track. Right down below, we have our 8 multi-track buses. Per each track, you could select a mono track or a stereo version. So we go from 1 up to 8. And we're going to have the return of these buses that could be patched into our bus returns in the center section of the board, or it could be patched elsewhere. Below our routing matrix over here, we could decide to send the signal pre or post fader, and as well decide to follow the main pan. Right below our matrix of our buses, we have two numbers, number 1 and 2, which are associated to two mono SSL dynamics, which can be found here in the master section. In the master section, we have two discrete SSL style compressor and gated expander. I will disengage my compressors and making sure to uncheck our 1 and 2 dynamic section. Right down below, we have our microphone input. The first red potentiometer, it's our mic pre-gain pot. This is the potentiometer you want to engage in order to pre-amplify the low voltage of any incoming signal coming from a microphone. Right down below, we have our line gain trim, which go to a maximum of plus 20 dB to a minimum of minus 20 dB. Next to it, we have a couple of buttons. We have our 48 phantom power, which can be engaged every time we plugged in a condenser microphone. We have a pad, an attenuator of approximately 20 dB whenever the signal is too hot prior to record. We have a phase inverter, and as well we could flip each single track from being inline monitoring to our record path. As you can see over here, the light is changing from green to red. We're going to discuss how to properly set it up the console for mixing and recording in a little bit. Moving down below, we have our filter section. We have our high pass filter, which could be engaged discretely from the EQ section. The high pass goes from a minimum of 20 Hz to a maximum of 500 Hz. And we have a high pass filter for each single track. Right below the high pass filter, we have our EQ section. Now the EQ section is a classic SSL K style equalizer. It features two semi-parametric EQ comprising the high frequencies and the low frequencies, and two parametric bandwidth, low mid frequencies and high mid frequencies. Now the great thing about the SSL EQ is that it could be completely customizable. So let's dive in and understand a little bit more how we can customize the EQ. First and foremost, every time you want to engage the equalizer, you have to press one of these three little buttons within the EQ section. The button that you want is EQ in. Once you engage the EQ, right now you are inserting within the signal path of any given track this EQ. Starting from our shelf filters within our semi-parametric section, in the low and the high frequencies are defaulted to be a shelf filter. But by pressing the bell button, we could flip our curve slope from being a shelf to being a peak or bell EQ. Same thing applies to the highs, the red encoders. The great thing about the shelving filter of the highs especially is that you could transform the shelving filter from a K series to a G series. By pressing this GEQ, you're flipping pretty much the shelving and as well could become a bell curve of a G series, which gives you a different types of tone on the overall channel. The semi-parametric section, it's pretty much self-explanatory. We're dealing with high mid frequencies and low mid frequencies. We have a Q knob to decide how broad or narrow our bandwidth should be, our gain knob, and of course our frequency selector. Along with inserting an EQ, we have also the possibility to insert an external outboard. As a matter of fact, still in this section, we have a button called Insert In. Now, when this button is light up, we're taking whatever feeds this track, taking it out through our patch bay, and we can connect any of our hardware outboard, whether it's an external compressor, another type of equalizer. Everything could be inserted within the signal path of each single track. And along with that, we can decide to make the insert, so whether it is a compressor or a different type of outboard, pre or post equalizer. So as you can see right now, we have a lot of versatility. Right down below our EQ section, we have our monitoring section, or actually our Q section. As a matter of fact, this board gives you the ability to have two independent Q sections, degree encoders over here. So to engage a Q send, you want to press on the encoder and turn the encoder. By pressing it again, as you can see, the on will stop lighting in orange. That means that the Q is off. Now the great thing about this is that it allows you to have a stereo Q, which is already patched in when we're in tracking mode with the monitoring system we have here in the studio, or this could be used to send a stereo signal to any of the stereo effects we have in the studio. As I was telling you, the Q over here is divided in pretty much three type of sends. We have our main Q, QA. By pressing this Alt effects selection and clicking on our potentiometer, right now we are on QB. That means that we can send another different types of effects. Of course, you can do either or. You cannot set both. And then we can transform this into effect sends, which is primarily used when it comes to mixing to send to a stereo effect a mono channel. I'm going to default this to QA and disengage it. Right down below, we have our two effects, which are technically four. We have effects 1. Again, if you press effects select Alt, you can go to effects 3, effects 2, and effects 4. So we have a total of 4 effects. These are the mono section of your Q or effects. Now, right here is where we select our record or mix bus assignment. As a matter of fact, as we're going to see shortly, the console has 2 modes. One is the mixing mode or monitoring mode, which is the mode we are in right now. And as a matter of fact, this mode is indicated by a lot of green line lights. But from this section over here, we could actually disengage the mix mode and select the recording mode or recording path. So you could do this thing by pressing simultaneously both buttons. And as you can see right now, we're flipping between mixing and recording. From this section down, we are transitioning from a pure analog circuitry to DAW controlling. The second potentiometer here could be used as a small fader in terms of recording, or actually controls the panning inside our DAW, as we're going to see shortly. Down below here, we have a beautiful display which gives us the name of the channel, and as well, if we flip the board in DAW mode, gives us the actual names or nomenclatures that we use within our Pro Tools session. Down here, we have our track selection, which works for both, either if we're setting the analog domain and selecting different tracks, or in the DAW inside Pro Tools. As you can see right now, I am selecting different tracks. By holding down select and click on adjacent select, you can create multiple selection. And by clicking one select, you will remove that selection. Right underneath the track selection mode, you have your solo and cut or mute tracks. Right below, we have our faders. These are motorized faders. There is no audio passing through them. They are extremely accurate when it comes to automation in the box and on the board. Next to the faders, we have a little button which allow us to actually select any given tracks when it comes to total recalling the tracks on our board or write an automation in Pro Tools. Moving along to the right side of the console, we are facing our master section. Now, the master section features two VU meters, which again are meant to represent the incoming level feeding the console out to the monitors, and you can as well select which path are they monitoring. Right below the left and right VU meter, we have a phase scope, telling us, of course, if our signal is in phase or out of phase. And right down below, we have a section that is designated to our talkback and listen back microphone. So whatever we're talking to the talent on the other side of the glass, these are the controls that will set up the level of whatever they hear coming from the control room to the live room. And as well, we have the possibility to engage an oscillator and a pink noise just to run a couple tests and see if signal is floating properly within the console. Down below here, we have our TFT screen. Right now, the TFT screen is actually controlling our DAW. By pressing this little button over here, we're now switching into the computer of the SSL. We're going to cover the computer shortly. For now, the few things I want to mention is that the computer is not whatsoever a touchscreen monitor, but rather you have your encoder to actually move across different projects, and you have this main 4 tabs, which are represented by these 4 buttons over here, the big gray buttons. And then the second row of gray buttons select the different menus that we have at our disposal. Down below, we have our DAW section. This part over here controls pretty much what we have in our DAW. How do we do this? Well, over here we have a HUI encoder lit up in blue. Every time this encoder is in blue, it's signaling that we are primarily working within our analog domain. As soon as I flip or press the encoder, the light disappears, and this means that right now we are fully inside Pro Tools. So right now, I could use my channel bank selection to bank 24 channels at a time, so the entire numbers of tracks that I have at my disposal on my board. Or by pressing channel here, I could scroll one track at a time and to bring, let's say, this selected track more towards my sweet spot. to reset from the most significant left track, you will uncheck channel, left arrow, and you're back to square one. From this tab, you could as well toggle between mix mode, edit mode, bring up the memory location window, transport, as well different other functions. Now right now we don't have it, but I could switch to send. And right now the board is actually showing me different types of sends, A, B, C, D, all the sends that I have in my DAW. I could use the send and the encoder, click on it, and right now we're in flip mode. That means that my main fader moved toward this spot, and down here I have actually my sends. I know that this doesn't make a lot of sense, so I'm going to give you an actual demonstration. So let's say I'm going to go on my lead vocal. Actually, let's go on a piano. Send A. Let's pretend this is a reverb. And we want to control both the amount of reverb and the fader. So right now I could actually select my send, go to send A. As you can see right now, I could click on send A, and right now my fader is controlling the level of my send, and my potentiometer here is controlling the level of the fader in Pro Tools. Once I found the right balance with my send, I'll click send again, back to pan, and right now as you can see here, the panning is controlling the actual pan inside Pro Tools. I'm going to flip back to my analog domain. Down here we have other parameters that still control our DAW, return to 0 and loop, quick punch, in and out, and as well our numeric keypad. Down below we have our arrows which control either selected tracks or our zoom, and our transport, play, record, enable, fast forward, and rewind. Moving all the way to the right side, next to the VU meter display, we have our LED peak display. This indicates, again, in a different types of reading, in peak mode, the level that feeds our monitors. And right next to them, we have a couple of other returns. We have our surround monitoring. This console could work as well in 5.1 surround. Right now, we're only using the left and right, but you could configure this to work in surround. And as well, we have our track buses return. Down below is where the things becomes a little bit more fun. Here we have a classic stereo SSL quad bus, the heart of the sound of this console. This works exactly like any other SSL quad bus case series. It could be engaged or disengaged. When engaged, it means that the entire mix will actually pass through our master, our mix bus, and then comes out. Right next to our mix bus, we have our two distinct, discrete dynamics that could be engaged by pressing the in button. Top to bottom, we have our compressor, which feature fast attack when the button is in, slow attack when the button's out, threshold, ratio, and release time. The yellow-red LED is actually the LED that belongs to the compressor, whereas the green one is the one that belongs to our gate or expander, which is down below. Again, our gate features a whole button, a link to link left and right gate, release time on both gates, threshold, attack, which could be, again, fast when the button's in, slow when the button's out, and a range control. Now, to show you how these three dynamics work, I'm going to go ahead and choose a couple of tracks. So right now I'm having my kick. I'm going to select dynamic 1, and on my snare, I'm going to select the number 2. Got my wife navigate my two dynamics.
I can't wait to get my pay. I'm feeling the weight. Isn't she pretty?
Select.
And oh, this city.
Same thing for my snare.
This is my life.
Slow attack.
In Dubai. Isn't this the life I've come to buy?
Without the compressor.
I've made my way, shake side
With.
roads okay. Isn't she pretty? And of this city. So let her sing to you and let her lead the dance for you.
Moving along. On the right side, we're having our Q stereo or effects master return, our truck bus master return. So that means that we could send whatever feeds the routing matrix to these returns. 4 discrete stereo returns for foldback or mix or record bus, and 2 discrete foldback A and foldback B returns. Down here, we have a section where we could select which monitor to mute in case we are in stereo surround. We have our LFE, surround right, left, left, right, and center. Down here, we have our monitor level control. The default state of it, it's off with the cut. This is how we normally leave it in the studio. So in order for you to listen whatever comes out of the speaker, remember to unmute the monitors and then raise the volume. Now there's a little trick about this potentiometer. Could be customized with different type of increase of decibel. As a matter of fact, right now, if you see, I am increasing the volume of 5 decibel each time. By clicking on the actual monitor, you move to fine mode, which you can increase the volume of 0.1 decibel at the time. Otherwise, you're in large mode. Right next to the cut, you have your dim, which is going to take whatever level of your speakers and dim it down, applying a pad. And the dim level could be actually selected by this dim button over here. Right now we have a pad of -20 dB. Along with this, we have our miscellaneous level. As I showed you before, over here is where we could set our dim level, our after fader listening, pre-fader listening, our phones, and our mini level. Moving on this right side, over here, we have our track selector. As a matter of fact, as I told you before, we could start selecting tracks. Let's say I'm going to move into my channel. Let's go here, harmonies. So channel 17. Now channel 17 features a group of harmonies, right? Which are stemmed into a stereo track. So what I could do is to select my track, click on stereo, and right now, as you can see, the lights have changed it, and even my LED level has changed, showing that right now the input signal that feeds this track is actually a stereo track. We could as well set all our tracks, and as you can see right now, the entire board is lit up, and decide what to do. Either set the entire board into tracking mode or stereo mode in case we're working with the console as a summing console. Along with this, we have our speaker selectors. Right now it's set it up to Mini A, which is our pair of main monitor. We're using Atom S3X in the studio. So again, another thing you want to check is making sure that the monitor path is on. And as well, you can engage a 5.1 system and a Mini B, which we're using a pair of Lipinski. All the way to the right, we have our monitor source. Right now, as you can see, we could select different types of monitor sources. Right now, as I told you before, we are in a function called mixing mode. Therefore, you want to make sure that the function that you're monitoring your audio comes from the mixing path. The other function that we generally use in the studio are recording whenever we're tracking and we want to hear whatever comes from the live room into the studio, and external B. External B is sort of like bonus track, and we have plugged in our computer. It means that every time you need to reference a mix, listen to a YouTube video, or Spotify, this is the monitor path or source that you want to engage. I'm going to move to my mix monitor source. Right next to it, we have our monitoring mode. As a matter of fact, I could mono up my entire mix to make sure there are not problems with phase and correlations. I could clear solo. Let's say I have these two tracks soloed. I could solo clear. I could as well fold back or fold down my entire mix in case I'm working in surround set and actually preview how the fold down mix will sound into stereo. Down here, finally, we have our main stereo buses. As a matter of fact, the SSL divides its output or its buses in two buses, the record bus and the mix bus. To select either or, you have to first select which bus are you using. Right now I'm using a mix bus. So in order to use the mix bus here, you want to hold down to this bottom right button and click where it says fader. As you can see right now, the fader or the master fader here will bounce up, showing me that right now it is what I'm listening. If I lower the master fader, my monitoring goes down and I don't hear anything else anymore. As soon as I bring my master fader up, my monitors starts to go up all over again. The cool thing about the stereo bus is that within my signal path, I could insert different things. One thing could be inserting my SSL G quad bus compressor. Now over here we have two possibilities. I'm going to go with compressor. So right now I'm clicking on it and nothing happens because you want to tell the board on which stereo bus you want to insert the stereo bus. So I'm going to hold down my mix bus, click on comp, an LED lit up. So right now by engaging my SSL G bus compressor, we should see something happen.
This is my life in Dubai. Isn't this the life I've come to buy? I've made my way
With
shakeside roads okay. Isn't she pretty?
Another great feature about this mix bus is that I could as well insert external gear. So let's say I want to work with a serial compression. So I want my SSL G bus compressor, but as well I want to plug in my Menley compressor. I could hold down my main stereo bus, click on insert, and now from my patch bay, I have an actual output called stereo mix send. I could plug this in into a compressor and then bring the output of that compressor into my mix stereo return. Lastly, over here, the top of it, we have this Greek letter, which indicates that if we want, we could actually lock in together and link more than one SSL AWS 48 if we want. We have only one, so in this case, we're not going to engage it. I'm going to go ahead and remove our dynamics. Lastly, down here, we have our talkback. Now, right now, our talkback is automatically patched in with the console. So if you want to talk with the artist on the other side of the glass, you want to make sure to press external talkback. What this will do, it will dim the level of the music coming from the monitor, allow you to actually talk through the talkback microphone into the headphone mix. The other talkback features are related to two different types of talkback. We have foldback A, which actually allow us to talk through a pair of speakers we have in the main room. Foldback B, which right now is not plugged into anywhere, and talk to all allow us to talk from the monitors inside the live room and as well through each single headphones. And this concludes the overview of the SSL AWS 948 Delta.